So good morning, everybody. And once again, thank you very much for joining us for our second webinar. This webinar provides a practical guide on how to register your relevant providers with ASIC. So I would like to begin this webinar by doing an acknowledgement of country, and I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I would also like to extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So by way of introduction, apologies, let me just move our screen. Sorry, Claire, can you just confirm if you can see the agenda or if you can still just see the practical guidance website, starting page?
I can see the agenda.
Oh, okay, excellent. So that's slightly different to what's on the screen, but that's all good. So by way of introductions, my name is Natasha Bronkhorst and I will be your presenter today. I work as an analyst within our financial advisors and investment managers team. So with me today, we also have Claire Kelleg and Emma Thatcher. So Claire is a senior lawyer within our team and Emma is a senior analyst within the same team, being the financial advisors and investment managers team. So both Claire and Emma will be the moderators for our presentation today. You do have the option of asking questions using the question and answer function, and Claire and Emma will collate these questions and they will be asked and answered at the end. If we can please ask that you only use this function to ask questions and not provide general commentary or chat. And it's simply because we expect that we will receive a large number of questions and we would like to be able to collate them and answer them all before the end of the webinar. If, however, we aren't able to answer all of the questions within the allotted time, we will provide a response to general questions or general themes arising using a frequently asked questions document. Because we will record this webinar and we will publish it on the ASIC website, we will not be publishing these questions. So they won't come up as being published. However, both Claire and Emma will see them come through. Today's webinar does involve sharing my screen so we can walk through the system so we can show you how an actual transaction is lodged and what it looks like. However, I will be using a test system. So the licensee and the relevant providers that we are using for this purposes today, they're fictional, they're not real, they're not a real licensee or a real relevant provider. I do just want to flag that our test system can be a little bit slow at times, so we just ask for your patience as we go through that. So in relation to the structure of this webinar, so we'll just provide a broad overview of what the registration transaction looks like on ASIC Connect. We'll then work through 4 examples so you can see what it looks like and how the declarations work. And then we'll also show you a notice of registration. So for those who attended yesterday, there are certain categories of relevant providers, there are types of relevant providers, and we use some terminology during this webinar. We'll just go through what the categories of relevant providers are. So starting off, a relevant provider, these are individuals also known as financial advisors within the industry, individuals who are authorised to provide personal advice to retail clients on relevant financial products. These can only be individuals. So if you have also authorised a corporate authorised representative, they are not a relevant provider. We also have provisional relevant providers who are relevant providers that are completing their professional year of work and training. And then we have got limited service time-sharing advisors, and these are relevant providers who only provide advice on time-sharing schemes. So relevant providers can then also fall within a subset of categories. So one of them can be an existing provider. So for a relevant provider to have been an existing provider, they needed to have been authorised to provide personal advice to retail clients at any time between 1 January 2016 and 1 January 2019. And on 1 January 2019, they should not have been disqualified or prohibited from providing personal advice to retail clients. Relevant providers and provisional relevant providers can also be qualified tax relevant providers. And these are relevant providers that are either 1, registered as a tax agent with the TPB, or 2, they have met the requirements set out by the Minister pursuant to Section 921BB of the Corporations Act. This generally involves them having completed the specified courses in commercial and taxation law. We then also have another category of relevant providers, and these are experienced providers. This is a new category of people, and is in essence for the relevant provider to meet this definition. They needed to have been a relevant provider for the last 10 years for any period during 1 January 2007 and 31 December 2021. They also never during this period or at any time before 31 December 2021 have either been banned or disqualified from providing personal advice or have given an undertaking not to provide personal advice during this period. It is, however, also important to note that relevant providers who failed to pass the exam by their exam cut-off date and remained authorised after this time cannot rely on the experienced provider pathway. These distinctions become important when we get to the declarations, and we'll go through that in more detail. We also use the terminology personal advice in this webinar, and when we refer to that, we are just talking about relevant providers who provide personal advice to retail clients on relevant financial products. It is important to note that most of these definitions are legal definitions, and they're contained within Section 910A of the Corporations Act. You can have a look at either our info sheet 276, which is the info sheet we covered yesterday, or 277, which is the info sheet that we're covering in more detail today for some an overview of those definitions as well. As mentioned today, we are providing a practical walkthrough of how the system work and how the declarations work. However, as part of the worked examples, we are assuming that licensees understand how these categories and definitions apply to their relevant providers. So we'll just talk a little bit about the ASIC Connect system and what it looks like. So firstly, when you log into ASIC Connect, it will ask you for your username and password. Most licensees will already have an account, and you use this ASIC Connect system when you appoint your relevant providers, when you update or maintain their details with ASIC, or when you cease or when you have ceased them to provide personal advice. You will now just have a new transaction that you can use where you can also register this relevant provider. So this is not a new system at all. Most licensees have already been using this. So after I have logged in, I then need to go to the Lodgement and Notifications tab. This is where I will be starting my registration transaction. So after I have clicked on after I clicked on the Lodgements and Notifications tab, I will then see a list of transactions that I could possibly lodge with ASIC. So from here, I need to select the Registration of Relevant Providers transaction. If you are registering a time-sharing advisor, you also need to select this option. So once I have selected the option and I have clicked Next, I will see an overview or a key information page. Licensees are encouraged to read through this document, as you'll find important information that you need to have at hand when you register your relevant provider. So firstly, before we start with the registration transaction, you will be asked to input your relevant provider's representative number. So it is important to note that you can only register relevant providers that you have authorised and appointed to the Financial Advisor Register. So I have provided an example here on the screen for where the licensee is trying to register someone that they have not already appointed. So in this scenario, you'll get an error message from the system saying that there is not currently an appointment for this financial advisor in progress. This might be that you have either authorised them just as an authorised representative, or you haven't lodged your appoint transaction at all. So once I have included their representative number, I will then be asked to confirm the relevant provider's details. So in here, if the principal place of business is incorrect, I can use the edit function to make any amendments. Same thing, if the email address is incorrect, I can use this function to update the email address. This is the email address that we are using for the relevant provider, and ASIC will send the relevant provider's notice of registration to this email. So if you have previously used, let's just say, compliance@licensee123.com.au, if you can please update that email address so it is the relevant provider's direct email address. Licensees will also be provided an opportunity to provide the phone number for their relevant provider. So once I'm happy with the personal details provided for the licensee, I will be asked to make the relevant declarations about the relevant provider that I'm registering. So here it is very important to note that each declaration applies differently depending on the relevant provider's circumstances. So what we will do is we will work through some examples to show how these declarations work in practice. I will be sharing my screen between the examples that we're working through, our InfoSheet guidance, and also the actual ASIC Connect test system. So just bear with me as I flick through them. But our first example is for a representative called Amy Dawson. Her representative number is on the screen, and we can see that she is authorised by Lloyds RE Insurance Pty Ltd. So for Amy's particular circumstances, she's an existing provider. She has already provided her licensee with a declaration that she is a fit and proper person to provide personal advice. Her licensee is not aware of any reason why she may not be a fit and proper person. Amy has already completed an approved degree. However, this did not include a course on commercial or taxation law. Amy did, however, not pass the financial advisor exam by 1 January 2022, and neither did she qualify for the exam extension. Amy did, however, remain authorised on her exam cut-off date, which for her was 1 January 2022. She subsequently passed the financial advisor exam in June 2022. So since then, Amy has commenced an accelerated professional year starting in February 2022, which she has now completed. Amy does not provide or intend to provide tax financial advice services. And it's important to note that Amy cannot rely on the experienced provider pathway. And this is because she remained authorised after her exam cut-off date, even though she did not pass the exam. So from here, we will just walk through how to submit this registration application. So I will go to my ASIC Connect system. I can see here that I have already logged in. I'm on the Lodgements and Notifications tab, and I can see here that I'm the authorised lodger for 2 licensees. Because Amy is authorised by Lloyds RE Insurance, I will select this licensee, and the transaction that I will select is register a relevant provider. As mentioned before, licensees will receive a cover page. So from here, it provides important information, including an overview of what information is required during the registration process. So licensees are encouraged to read this and familiarise themselves with this information before they submit a transaction. So from here, I will select Next. And just bear with us a little bit. It's a little bit slow in the test system, but here I can see that I have been asked to include the relevant provider's representative number. So Amy's representative number as on the screen, I have just inputted that into the system. I have clicked Next. And I can see here that Amy's details are already here under her representative details. I can see that her principal place of business is listed as 127 to 129 Murray Street, Pyrmont. If this is incorrect, I can use the edit function. I can also see that her email address does not appear to be correct. So I will use the edit function to update Amy's details. So for our purposes, we'll say that it's amy.dawson@asic.gov.au, and I will click Save. I can also use this opportunity to provide a phone number for Amy. So I will just do that now. And I will click Save. And now that I'm happy with her contact details, I will select Next and go through to the declaration page. So from here, the licensee is required to make 6 declarations about the relevant provider, and we will start with the first declaration. So the licensee is asked that at the date of this declaration, has the relevant provider given them a declaration that they are a fit and proper person to provide personal advice? So based on the facts provided to us in this example, Amy has already given this declaration to her relevant provider. So I can tick that I have received this declaration from Amy. As mentioned in yesterday's webinar, the licensee is not required to comment about the factors that went into this assessment made by Amy. The second declaration asks about whether the licensee is aware of any reason why the relevant provider might not be a fit and proper person to provide personal advice. So in our circumstances here, the licensee is not aware of any reason why that might be. So I will tick that I am not aware of any reason why the relevant provider is not a fit and proper person to provide personal advice. The third declaration asks about whether or not the relevant provider has complied with the education and training standards contained in section 921B subsection 2. So to find out a little bit more information about what this is, I will be going to info sheet 277, and you can locate this on the ASIC website, or you can just Google, ASIC info sheet 277, and it should come right up. So as mentioned before, there's a whole lot of definitions, but if I just scroll down to the frequently asked questions about this, I can see that there are 8 questions. The first talks about, what declarations are required, what factors you need to consider when giving your fit and proper declaration. But the one that I want to look at right now is question 5, which talks about the education and training standards contained in section 921B subsection 2, which is the degree standard. So based on the information here from Amy, we can see that she is a relevant provider. Sorry, she is an existing provider, but she is not relying on the experienced provider pathway. So I just want to find the correct category in here. And I can see here that this category here are for relevant providers who are existing providers, but are not relying on the experienced provider pathway. So within table 1, I then want to find the relevant circumstances that are applicable for Amy. Knowing that Amy did not pass the exam before 1 Jan 2022, nor did she qualify for the exam cutoff date, but she remained authorised after this exam cutoff date, I know that she falls into the second condition. This is where the existing provider did not pass the financial advisor exam by her cutoff date, and they remained authorised to provide personal advice at the start of the exam cutoff date. So we can see that the applicable standard for Amy, who falls into this bucket, is that the degree standard does apply to her. She is required to have obtained an approved degree before she can be registered on the register. Based on our facts here, I understand that Amy has completed an approved degree. So I can see here that the guidance says that if she has obtained an approved degree, you must declare that the degree standard has been met. So I will then go back to my declarations. I will find the relevant declaration that says, I declare the relevant provider has met the education and training standards contained in section 921B subsection 2. The fourth declaration talks about whether or not the relevant provider has met the education and training standards set out in section 921B subsection 3. So I will just go back to info sheet 277. I will find frequently asked question number 6, which talks about the education and training standards set out in section 921B sub 3, which talks about the exam standard. It is important to note that all relevant providers, except for timeshare advisors, are required to have passed the exam before they can be registered. So here I can see that the standard and this education requirement applies to Amy. And I can confirm, it says here that if she has passed the exam, you must declare that she has met the exam. Based on the facts provided for us by Amy, she has passed the exam in June 2022. So I can make that relevant declaration saying that she has met the education and training standards set in section 921B subsection 3. The next declaration talks about whether or not the relevant provider has met the education and training standards met in section 921B subsection 4. And if I go back to my frequently asked questions document, question 7 talks about these standards, and this is about the professional year. So once again, I'm required to find the relevant circumstances that apply to my relevant provider and have a look at those conditions. So as before, we know that Amy is a relevant provider who was an existing provider, but is not relying on the experienced provider pathway. As such, I need to scroll to the bottom and have a look at table 2 and see which of these conditions are applicable for her. Similarly to before, we know that she did not pass the exam by her exam cutoff date, and she remained authorised after this date. So I can see here that the professional standard does apply to her. So from here, the document gives some guidance about what the declaration, the required declaration that you're required to make. So here, it says if the existing provider has completed the professional year, you must declare that the standard has been met. So based on the facts provided to us, Amy has commenced her professional year in February 2022, and she has now completed that professional year. So as such, I can go back to our declaration and I can declare that she has met the education and training standards set out in section 921B, subsection 4. Our last declaration is about whether or not the relevant provider provides or intends to provide a tax financial advice services, and if so, whether the relevant provider is a qualified tax relevant provider. So based on the facts provided to me, I can see that Amy does not provide or intend to provide tax financial advice services, which means that I need to select the last declaration in the box saying that the relevant provider does not provide or intend to provide tax financial advice services. Once I'm happy with all of the declarations that I have made, I will select next. And I can see here that Amy Dawson is the relevant provider that I'm registering. Her lodgement fee is $50. So if I just go back to our examples, we also have a second advisor or relevant provider that we want to register with ASIC. This is Charlie Fred. The particulars that we know about Charlie is that he is an existing provider. He has also given his licensee a declaration that he is a fit and proper person to provide personal advice. It is, however, important to note that he has disclosed to his licensee that he left his previous job following an investigation into whether or not he stole money. However, it was ultimately found that he did not. Charlie passed the financial advisor exam before 1 January 2022. He has not completed a professional year and he has not yet obtained an approved degree either. As mentioned, Charlie does not intend to rely on the experienced provider pathway. However, he is a registered tax agent and therefore a qualified tax relevant provider. In addition, he also intends to provide tax financial advice services to retail clients. So from here, the licensee will go back to ASIC Connect. I will click Add Another Relevant Provider. I will need to provide the representative number for Charlie. And once I have done so, I will once again get to the page where I am required to confirm his details. So we've already covered how to add and edit the details. So as a result, I will just skip through to the declarations. So from here, once again, the licensee is asked whether or not they have received a declaration from Charlie that he is a fit and proper person. And based on the facts provided to us, the licensee has received this declaration. The second declaration asks whether or not the licensee is aware of any reason why the relevant provider may not be a fit and proper person to provide personal advice to retail clients. So in relation to what this means for Charlie, if we go back to info sheet 277, we have provided some more information in frequently asked question 4 about the factors that the licensee is required to consider. We did go through this yesterday in the webinar as well, but it includes details about whether a license has been cancelled, they've been involved in a failure to give effect to an AFCA determination. But it is important to note that this list is not exhaustive. It is just some of the things the licensee needs to consider. So in doing this registration application, as the licensee, I am aware that there may be a reason why Charlie is not a fit and proper person, and that is because he has been accused of stealing a client trust money. So as a result, I will make a declaration saying that I am aware there may be a reason he is not a fit and proper person. The licensee is now provided with an opportunity to provide some additional information to ASIC. This isn't mandatory, however, licensees are encouraged to provide additional information if they find it helpful. So in here, I might mention that he was accused of stealing client money, but cleared. If you provide any information in here or mention that you are aware of a reason the relevant provider is not a fit and proper person, ASIC will still register the relevant provider. So our next question talks about, at the date of this application, has the relevant provider met the education and training standards set out in section 921B sub 2? So this is the, if I go back to my frequently asked question, this is the degree standard. So to find out how this applies to Charlie, I'm once again going to the information about relevant providers who are existing providers but not relying on the experienced provider pathway. However, because Charlie passed the exam before 1 January 2022, he falls into a different bucket to Amy. So from here, I can see that this degree standard does not apply until 1 January 2026. So therefore, if Charlie has not obtained an approved degree yet, which is evident on the facts, I can declare that this degree standard does not apply. If he has, however, obtained an approved degree, I will simply say that he has met the standard. So for us, Charlie has not yet obtained an approved degree, and I will say that this section does not apply to the relevant provider. As mentioned before, the next declaration talks about the education and training standards set out in section 921B sub 3, and this is about the financial advisor exam. And we know from our facts that Charlie has already passed the exam. Our next question talks about whether or not Charlie has met the education and training standards set out in section 921B subsection 4. So if I go back to info sheet 277, I will go down to frequently asked question 7, which is about the professional year standard. And I will go to the section where we talk about relevant providers who are not, who are experienced providers but are not relying on the experienced provider pathway. So once again, because Charlie has already passed the exam and he did this before his exam cutoff date, I can see here that the professional year standard does not apply to him. So because Charlie has not done a professional year standard and the standard does not apply to him, I can declare that this standard is not applicable to him. And I will just make that relevant declaration now. Our last declaration in relation to Charlie is about whether he provides or intends to provide tax financial advice services to retail clients. So from here, I will go to frequently asked question 8. And you can read through this in more detail because the information changes depending on the class of relevant provider you're registering. However, I can see here that if you are a qualified tax relevant provider, if you're a registered tax agent, and that's applicable for Charlie in our circumstances. So going down to table 3, I can see that as a tax agent, Charlie is exempt from having completed the specified courses as a relevant provider, and he is taken to be a qualified tax relevant provider. So here I can see that from here, because, sorry, let me just take a step back. So even though he's exempt from completing the courses, he is taken to be a qualified tax relevant provider. And that distinction is important when we get to our declarations. So just taking a step back to our declarations, I can see here that the first declaration is that Charlie provides or intends to provide a tax financial advice services, and he is a qualified tax relevant provider. So I can make that declaration. When I click next, the system will just validate the responses provided, and I can see here that Charlie Fred has also been added. I will just go back to our third example. We also have Lily Smith that we want to register. Lily's circumstances are slightly different in the fact that she was deemed registered with ASIC, and this was because she was an individual tax financial advisor with the Tax Practitioners Board immediately before 1 January 2022, and she was also a relevant provider immediately before 1 January 2022. It is important to note that Lily has not changed licensee since being deemed registered, and she has not been subject to a banning or disqualified order. So if I try and register Lily, I will get an error message, and this is because she is already registered under my license. So we'll just go back to the lodgement transaction. I'll try and add her representative number. And if I click next, I will get an error message saying that this representative is already registered by the licensee. So this is how I can see whether or not I have registered her previously. Our last example is for Zach Smith. So the representative details for Zach is on the website, on the screen. But from here, I can see that he is an existing provider. However, he has not provided his licensee with a declaration to say that he is a fit and proper person to provide personal advice. He has, however, made a declaration to his licensee that he is intending to rely on the definition, that he meets the definition of being an experienced provider, and he has passed the exam before 1 January 2022. He has not yet, however, completed an approved degree. He has not completed a professional year. And as mentioned before, he's intending to rely on the experienced provider pathway, which is why he has made this declaration to his licensee. Zach does, however, not intend to provide tax financial advice services. So in registering Zach's details, I can see here that his details are already provided. So assuming that this is correct, I will proceed through to the registration declarations. So here, because I have not received a declaration from Zach, I need to tick that I have not received this declaration from him. It is important to note that licensees are required to provide the declaration that corresponds to the financial advisor's details. So we'll just work through the rest of the declaration. So we will assume that the licensee is not aware of any reason why Zach is not a fit and proper person. When we talk about the education and training standard contained in section 921B subsection 2, this is a little bit different because he is intending to rely on the experienced provider pathway. So I can scroll to the section that talks about relevant providers who are relying on this pathway. And we have provided some commentary here that around when you can rely on this pathway. So as part of this, the licensee needs to have received a declaration from Zach that he is intending to rely on this pathway. And once this has happened, I can see here how the standard applies. So from here, because Zach has made the application that he is relying on the experienced provider pathway, he is taken to have met the degree standard. This means that he can, just if we just scroll down a little bit more. So here, if the relevant provider has made this declaration and has provided the licensee with a copy of this declaration, the licensee must declare that the standard has been met. So because Zach is taken to have met the degree standard, I can say that he has met this. I also know from the facts provided to us that he has already passed the financial advisor exam. So I can mention that he has met the education standard set out in section 921B subsection 3. And I know if I just go to info sheet 277 again about the education and training standards relating to a professional year standard, I know from reading this that relevant providers who are relying on the experienced provider pathway is not required to complete a professional year. So once I have read this and understood Zach's condition, I can declare that section 921B subsection 4 does not apply. I also know from Zach's details that he is not intending to provide tax financial advice services to retail clients. So if I select next, I will get an error message. And this is because I cannot register the relevant provider until I have received a declaration from him that he is a fit and proper person. You'll get a similar error message if you are saying that the relevant provider, let's say, has not passed the exam and they're required to do so. This is to prompt the licensee to go and have a look and make sure that they're authorising a relevant provider that firstly is entitled to be authorised, and secondly that they've met the relevant education and training standards. So for the purposes of our demonstration, as the licensee, I've gone back to Zach. He has now given me this declaration, and I can tick now that I have received this declaration from him. If, however, you were doing this transaction application live, you could just save and exit and come back to Zach's details. So from here, I can see that I want to register 3 relevant providers. The lodgement fee is $50 each and my total fee is $150. When I click next, I will also be required to give various declarations to ASIC. This includes that to the best of my knowledge, the information I've provided is true and accurate, that I understand that it is a serious offence to give false or misleading information to ASIC. Therefore, if you have not received a declaration from your relevant provider, it is important that you don't provide false or misleading information to ASIC, and that goes to the same with the other declarations that you're required to make. So from here, I'm also just confirming that I understand that you're lodging the document in terms with terms and conditions of ASIC's electronic lodgement, and then I'm agreeing that I am lodging this on behalf of the licensee. So once I have made my relevant declarations, I will be taken through to the payment page. And once it loads, we can see that licensees have a few options about how they'd like to pay. You can either select credit card, BPay, or an invoice. So you just select the relevant option and click next. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I will just do the payment via invoice. So I will pay later and I will get a confirmation email from the system. So I've got my transaction number and I can see that my fee was $150. So if I were to pay by credit card straight away and there are no issues with registering the document, the relevant provider will receive a notice of registration. So we have provided a draft registration notice on the screen. It provides the details such as the relevant provider's name, their contact details, the date that they're being registered under. Similarly, the licensee will get a notice of registration. It looks relatively similar. However, there's also an annexure or an attachment B that lists each of the relevant providers that have been registered. So in our scenario, we've registered 3 relevant providers, so there's 3 individual lines for them. There will also be the date that they are registered. So just as a recap, licensees can apply to register their relevant provider with ASIC now, and all licensees must register their relevant providers before 1 February 2024. Because the ASIC Connect portal is open now, we encourage licensees to do and get on there and register their relevant providers as soon as they can. It is important, and as we demonstrated by the examples, the declarations vary greatly depending on the personal circumstances of the relevant provider. So it is important to understand the relevant provider that you are registering to make sure that you're giving the correct declaration. Lastly, we'd just like to reiterate to please ensure that you provide the relevant provider's contact details. So it's got to be their place of business, their email address, and their phone number as well. And this is very important because the notice of registration for the relevant provider will be sent to them using that email address. We'd just like to mention as well that we have produced a range of guidance and information sheets for industry. So we've covered these already in yesterday's webinar, but they include info sheet 268 about the tax financial advice services, info sheet 277, which is an overview of the registration requirement, as well as info sheet 277, which is the one that we went through today about declarations and guidance for which declaration you've got to make depending on which circumstances. If you are stuck on how to lodge an actual transaction, you can rewatch this webinar or you can follow our step-by-step guidance. I will now open up to Claire if there has been any questions and we can answer them as well.
Thanks very much, Natasha. There has been quite a few questions, so I've collated some that we'll be able to answer today, and the rest will collate in themes and provide a document which sets those out alongside these webinars, so everyone has the benefit of them. And just noting that we've only got 5 minutes left on time, so I'll get through as many as I can now. The first question that I have is, I'm having trouble logging into ASIC Connect. Should I email the registration inquiries email address for assistance? The answer to that question is no. So we can't assist you with that particular question, but you can call the ASIC call centre for assistance or lodge an online inquiry asking for help, and someone from that specific team will be able to get back to you as soon as possible. How long will it take for a licensee to register a representative? So as you saw today, it's a little bit difficult to estimate a specific time frame to lodge a particular application for registration, just because there's a multitude of factors that need to be taken into consideration for each particular relevant provider. So we expect that licensees will be most efficient completing the registration application form if they verse themselves with the requirements, that they've really taken time to go through our guidance, and that they have all the information that they need about their relevant providers in advance of sitting down to complete the registration application forms. There will be some efficiencies in registering multiple advisors. So you can register up to 25 advisors per transaction. So there will be efficiencies there. And we just really encourage AFS licensees to give themselves plenty of time to register their relevant providers and to make sure that this is definitely completed by the 1st of February 2024. That's when the requirement commences. Who's responsible for registering each relevant provider? So AFS licensees are responsible for registering their relevant providers through ASIC Connect. This isn't something that relevant providers individually can do. AFS licensees are also responsible for ensuring that the relevant providers don't provide personal advice to retail clients from the 1st of February if they're not registered. Very important. Individual representatives are also responsible under the new requirement. So that's the key message. Don't provide personal advice to retail clients from the 1st of February unless you're registered. Another question we have is there a guide provided with screenshots to assist completion of the application forms? Yes, there is. This is available on ASIC's website, and it's linked to question 10 of information sheet 276. Can a registration application form be paused as you part way through and started at a different time? Yes, it absolutely can. We've got another question about tax financial advice and whether the information from the FAR that's submitted as part of the appoint maintain transaction would flow through into the registration application form. The answer to that question is no, it doesn't carry across, and that's because the information sought under the registration application form is slightly different to that through the appoint and maintain process. So you'll see that when you're going to complete the forms. How long will it take for ASIC to review and approve registrations, especially during high volume periods such as January? Can we provide any guidance? ASIC recommends that you commence engaging with this requirement as soon as possible and also start registering your relevant providers as soon as possible. So the approval period's generally 1 business day, but it can take up to 5 business days for a decision to be made. With these timeframes in mind, this is another question, is there a likelihood that new AR appointments may have a period where they're appointed but unable to provide advice until the registration notice comes through? Yes, this is possible. However, in most cases, there won't be a significant period of delay. The appointment process must take place before the relevant provider can be registered, and they must be authorised, appointed and registered before they can provide personal financial advice from the 1st of February 2024. So to avoid this possibility becoming an issue, ASIC just recommends that AFS licensees have robust appointment processes in place which encompass each of the relevant requirements, and that all new relevant provider appointments are registered as part of that process. While talking about new appointments, it's worth noting that if you've onboarded anybody during the course of 2022 or 2023 and that they still are authorised by you, it's highly likely that these people will need to be registered under this new requirement, even if they were deemed to be registered under the transitional provisions. So if you've onboarded someone before 2022 and you've received a notice of deemed registration, they're still authorised by you, you don't need to do anything. But if you've onboarded somebody and you haven't received a notice of deemed registration, it's highly likely that you'll need to register that person. I do have plenty more questions to get through, but unfortunately we're at time. So we'll collate those as I mentioned, and we'll post those on our website in due course.
And we just like to thank everybody. Thank you for attending. And then, like Claire said, we will collate the questions and go from there. In the meantime, if you've got any further queries about registration, you're welcome to email us at registration.inquiries@asic.gov.au. And once again, thank you very much for your time.